Are you ready? Yeah. So, 3 years ago, there appeared in my mailbox a strange letter. Somebody named J. Leeming. I didn't read him for a couple of months, but then I read them and I said, man, this is very interesting. So Jay has published a small book now, and he lives in the East Coast. He worked for a while in New York, typing things while reading the story of Kabetza di Vaca and how all his horses were eaten. So will you do that tonight?
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah. And he's done poems already famous, such as the one about getting in the car. You all know that one? And the guy says, there wasn't any motor in your car. We'll get him to do that. So we don't have to say anything about him. This is a tall, stringy guy. And one of the brilliant, sweet poet.
Thank you, Robert. All right, so here's a couple poems for you. What are we doing? This is called Apple. Sometimes when eating an apple, I bite too far and open the little room the lovers have prepared. And the seeds fall onto the kitchen floor, and I see that they are tear-shaped. Just a little apple seed there for you. This is called The Light Above Cities. Sitting in darkness, I see how the light of the city fills the clouds, rose-water light poured into the sky like the single body we are. It is the sum of a million lives, a man drinking beer beneath a light bulb, a dancer spinning in a fluorescent room, a girl reading a book beneath a lamp. Yet there are others, astronomers, thieves, lovers, whose work is only done in darkness. Sometimes I don't want to show these poems to anyone. Sometimes I want to remain hidden, deep in the coals, with the one who pulls the stars through a telescope's glass, the one who listens for the click of the lock, the one who kisses softly a woman's eyes. And this one, some of you probably heard before. We should almost do it in chorus, but I'll just read it anyway. Supermarket historians. All historians should be supermarket cashiers. Imagine what we'd learn. Your total comes to 1066, and that's the year the Normans invaded Britain. Or, that'll be 1861, the year the Civil War began. Now all my receipts are beaches, where 6-year-olds find bullets in the sand. My tomatoes add up to Hiroshima. And if I'd bought one more carton of milk, the cashier would be discussing the Battle of the Bulge and not the Peloponnesian War. But I'm tired of buying soup cans full of burning villages. Tired of hearing the shouts of Marines storming beaches in the bread aisle. I want to live in a house carved into a seed inside a watermelon, to look up at the red sky as shopping carts roll through the aisles like distant thunder. You know, it's happened to me since writing that I've gotten the total 1861, and it used to be like I would remember my poem and I'd be like, hey, you know, that's the Civil War, you know, and now I don't even mention it, but a while ago it happened to me the other way. Like, it was 1861, and they were like, oh, that's the Civil War, or something like that. And I was like, yeah, well, never mind. You know, it's like, you can write your own poem, you know, whoever that was, you know, So this is called Man Writes Poem. A lot of these are funny, but they hinge on that whole thing of the community and the person who's separate from it, or withdrawing, or apart, like in the story today. So this is a poem, just me and living in Brooklyn at the time, and imagining if poets got the big news stories, like the astronauts and things like that. Man writes poem. This just in, a man has begun writing a poem in a small room in Brooklyn. His curtains are apparently blowing in the breeze. We go now to our man Harry on the scene. What's the story down there, Harry? Well, Chuck, he has begun the second stanza, and he seems to be doing fine. He's using a blue pen. Most poets these days use blue or black ink, so blue is a fine choice. His curtains are indeed blowing in a breeze of some kind, and what's more, his radiator is whistling somewhat. No metaphors have been written yet, but I'm sure he's rummaging around down there in the tin cans of his soul, and will turn up something for us soon. Hang on, just breaking news here, Chuck. There are birds singing outside his window, and a car with a bad muffler has just gone by. Yes, definitely a confirmation on the singing birds. Excuse me, Harry, but the poem seems to be taking on a very auditory quality at this point, wouldn't you say? Yes, Chuck, you're right, but I would hesitate to predict, after all these years of experience, just where this poem is going to go. Why, I remember being on the scene with Robert Frost in 47, and with Wallace Stevens in 53. And if there's one thing about poems these days, it's that, hang on, something's happening here. He's just compared the curtains to his mother. And he's described the radiator as roaring deep with the red walrus of history. Now that's a key line, especially appearing here, somewhat late in the poem, when all of the similes are about to go home. In fact, he seems a bit knocked out with the effort of writing that line. And who wouldn't be? Looks like, yes, he's put down his pen and has gone to brush his teeth. Back to you, Chuck. Well, thanks, Harry. Wow, the life of the artist. That's it for now, but we'll keep you informed of more details as they arise. Thank you. All right. Here's another one that's a little different in tone. This is called Back Porch. Before my father needed an oxygen machine to breathe, he would often sit on the back porch, smoking on summer nights, and I would join him to talk about music or the moon as the sun went down and the cicadas rattled in the willow trees. If we sat there long enough, darkness would fill the backyard until our bodies disappeared and the orange glow of his cigarette as he inhaled became all that I could see of him, as if his life were only that burning and the ashes scattered afterwards in the grass. And here's a wild card for you. There was a lot of talk in the poetry classes about should poetry rhyme or not, and I think we all kind of agreed that these days it really shouldn't. But once in a while, you know. So this is a villanelle, basically. It's a poem in a little form. It's about Tiresias, who's the you probably know who he is, the Greek prophet who was blind and could see the future. He'd spent time as a man and a woman, and for some reason that helped him know all things for some reason. Only in blindness was Tiresias wise, when he looked inward and began to see. Vision begins with the closing of the eyes. By wounds alone we know the world. The lies we tell ourselves are healed by injury. Only in blindness was Tiresias wise. Weeds and bottles, bones and railroad ties, in the muck that fills the bottom of the sea, vision begins. When you close your eyes, the heart begins to see, to recognize the scars of winter on the fallen trees. Only in blindness was Tiresias wise, when he lost the light of summer skies and found within a map for wrecked Ulysses. Vision begins with the closing of the eyes. My dream guitar is cracked, its broken cry fumbles in the dark for different speech. Only in blindness was Tiresias wise. Vision begins with the closing of the eyes. And Robert requested the law office. So let's do the law office. This is, I was living in New York and working this temp job in an office. And sometimes poems are easy. You just write down what's right in front of your face. And this was one of those. It's called Law Office. I am sitting in an adjustable chair on the 32nd floor of a skyscraper in New York City. I am typing a list of 1,000 names into a computer. As I work, I am listening through headphones to a recording of the journals of Cabeza de Vaca, a Spanish explorer who traveled to the United States in the 15th century. The office is air-conditioned, and I am wearing a tie. A hurricane has drowned half of de Vaca's crew, and most of the rest are sick and dying of starvation on an island off the Florida Keys. The names I'm entering are plaintiffs in a case against Union Carbide Chemical Company, and about half of them are deceased. Some filing cabinets are behind me. One is marked Bhopal, and another reads breast implants. The secretary sitting beside me goes to get a cup of coffee. De Vaca and his crew have eaten their horses and are now sailing in a makeshift raft that uses their hides for sails. I keep typing. At noon, a man comes through the office and waters all the plants. Every hour, another sailor dies of pneumonia or loses his grip and slides off the raft into the storm. I'm just going to give you two more here real quick. This is called Photocopier, keeping with the office theme. Photocopier. It hums and blasts and waits. It is very quiet for a machine that eats trees. But then it doesn't really, only holding their thin slices close, long enough to tell them all our plans. Its cover and glass plate are really a mouth and an ear that whisper when you close them. But tell it everything, for its secret is forgetfulness and the darkness it needs to make its brief, flat day. So I'll end with this one. This is a poem. It's got 5 short little sections. It's called Walking Coy Hill Road, which is a road in Vermont. I used to walk a lot. 2 weeks until solstice, and there's so much light, every day feels like 3 days. I spent the first one eating oatmeal, the second washing down a pile of old boards for $10 an hour. On the third day, I took a bath in accordance with the scriptures that my body learned while floating in the womb. Perhaps because life is short, we should live each moment at full volume with the pedal jammed against the floor. At sunset, I sat down by the pond to eat my brown rice, and a gun went off in the trees. I have spent time in the alternate universes where you and I live happily ever after, like the one in which I am just a little older and so marry you after all, or the one in which we both live in the same town and so get to know each other more gently. But it's no use. For us to be together now, so much would have to be different that we would be strangers to ourselves. Sometimes I catch sight of us sitting at a table in the bakery, each of us held by the other, though we are not touching. This morning on the news, the Attorney General said that citizens' rights must be violated further, or else our ability to catch terrorists will be more difficult. These days, eloquence in the Capitol is shot on sight. Jefferson's 1,000-volume library can only show us how far we've fallen. A circle of light we see above us in the dark before the well opening is covered by a stone. Sometimes the moon writes your shadow on the road ahead of you like it's trying to tell you something. My ancestors probably knew that language, but I could only understand it if I slept for 20 years at a 90-degree angle to the nightly news. So I walk in boots of ignorance, hoping I'll hear the message again in a dream, or that any damage I may cause will be healed by the next ice age. These words arrived suddenly, like large glasses of water handed to me as I walked down Coy Hill Road at dusk. I nearly dropped them before I made it into the house. In fact, it's possible I left most of the gift out there in the dark, to be swallowed by coyotes or woven as raindrops into the phoebe's mossy nest. If anything's missing, I'm not sure I could tell. When you've lived indoors as long as we have, entire continents can vanish beneath the sea before you notice anything's gone. Thank you.
The next poet is an old friend of this conference, Timothy Young. His people were railway workers in St. Paul. Is that right, Tim? And they come from those Irish families. They go out and hunt in the fall and have a vigorous family life. And when he goes home for Thanksgiving or something, we're all jealous. So recently he has begun working in the Red Wing School for boys who are in trouble. And this has been a tremendous gift to that school. By the way, Thomas Tranströmer worked in a similar place when he was much younger in Sweden. And he wrote 17 haikus in that place. And so Tim gave those away to his students, those haikus recently. That's a very sweet connection of Swedish poetry and American. So Tim, I think, does a fantastic job with those young men. And he can tell you about what's going on with them and what a lack of fathering they've had, what a lack often of mothering they've had, and the incredible things that you need to do with them to bring them to such a shape that they won't be in the system for another 10 years. So this is a man with real heart, and the poems, I think, are just wonderful. And this book was published, in fact, by the Thousands Press, which is just another name for the Minnesota Men stuff. So anyway, this is Timothy Young, and it's
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, guys. I'm going to read a couple poems about Red Wing in a few minutes, but right now, what's on the mind of most of us when we're on the outside is the big flood. So I want to read a couple flood poems. This is a poem called Tears. In this world many tears are shed, and the store for them is endless. Earth holds her tears in her marshes, her fens, in her bogs. The tears of people sear their eyes and sting their sorrowful tongues. Even the tears of happiness are born of mortality and pain. The last tears of Jesus were of his blood and were to contain all the grief of humankind, all the grief which had been and all that would be. Some say that rainbows are made of light dancing through the tears of angels. For only angels can know at once all the joy and all the sorrow on earth and in the heavens. And the most tender of all are tears of dust flowing from the eyes of our dead, and we don't know how to respond. One more. This is called White Pelicans. I get a sad smile when I see white pelicans swimming among the ashes and the dark maples that tower over the flood's black water. They are homely angels in a cathedral twilight, graceful, slow, each feeding alone on a current as steady as gravity and as deep as grief. And another painful poem about my students down at Red Wing. I worked 5 years with the sex offenders. And I retired last fall after 8 years. And it was enough time to work there, and it was time to get out. Otherwise, cynicism just starts concretizing in your body. And it was time to leave. But this is for my students. The Snake in Anger class. The boys in this class are teenaged pedophiles, rapists, or boy toy prostitutes. They're here for enforced anger treatment. After I tell them the lindworm story about an enormous snake who kills all his brides until the wise bride scrubs him with lye and wire brushes. My students draw crazy snakes on large flip chart paper with colored markers and crude jagged lines. However, one boy who revels in Satanism with the disgust he provokes, he quickly and lightly pencils an elaborate snake. As a child, his mother kept him close, too close. And she guided his small organ by hand. Then he forced small girls to do the same. In class, his coiled snake rears a hooded head and its two perfect teeth. The two teeth drip gray blood, and the venom he's drawn with his deft and practiced touch. We can't send our sex offenders into isolation. We can't make them carry all of our shadow. But we're doing it. I want to turn a corner. My wife loading her cattle. Before 5 a.m. in late November, she stepped into the deep mouth of the trailer and sweetly called to her cattle. Come on, boys. Look what I have for you. Sniffing the metal and blackness before them, the twin steers backed away from her beckon. I squeezed the stall gate against the smaller one's ribs till he leaped toward her voice and went in. Good boy, good boy. The second steer turned and kicked on the pivot, his brown bulk confused by her words. He resisted the driver's twist of a tail, but finally he had to jump into the darkness. It's okay, baby. And his mother offered him corn. The floor trembled. The trailer door slammed. Something rumbled in the meat and muscles. My wife wept as her cattle boys left to the Watkins locker in Plum City. She said nothing more. Neither did I. Then we both drove off to work. You know, something's dying so someone else can live. It's both a joyful and a sad thing at the same time. I'd like to do a poem based upon our singing group that we had here the other night. And this poem is called Joy Soup. There are nights when a veil drops and I see that we're swimming in a vast tureen of joy soup. Our mumbled songs and our hoarse shouts and our gurgling, rambling chants simmer over Glenn's flamin' guitar. Our words are fruit grease, wiggling on the surface. Robert's poems are honeydews floating in the air. With a cherry in his voice, David sings to a goddess who smacks her lips at the aroma of our cooking souls. Light a match. My poems are just kindling for the stove. Let my words be incense thrown on the charcoal. Let me be a sugar cube dropped into the tea. I'm going to finish with a narrative poem. It's called Yada Churns the Ritual Sea and Maidens Rockin' Olies. On a sweltering Saturday in July in Maiden Rock, Wisconsin, in Oli's Bar, 3 musicians play just for fun. Yada sings and chords his guitar. Gib hits a small snare and a hi-hat. Steve's brought his sousaphone. When Yada begins, Light My Fire, that 35-year-old song is more because of our years and Steve's achy sousaphone solo. Yada strums new life into the stale words, and memories lead our hearts into the inner dance halls and pavilions. The dark years since adolescence add shadings to our teenage lyrics. Our knees hop, our backs swivel, and our hips begin to sway. The bar's mahogany shadows resonate like the wine glass which a nail-painted mother fingers. She once danced with a carpenter whose bold and upright legs melted against her thighs. She remembers his strong grip on her future. Gib grins, raps his snare, rattles a cymbal, and embellishes Yada's strum. Melodies float like patchouli that he tasted years ago on the West Bank. Rhythms return, magic is back. Through each revolution of the ceiling fan, the unseen world is glimpsed and glimpses back. Motes of light, as if distant moons reflect in the stacks of cocktail glasses. There's a sing-along twinkle in everyone's eye. There's a hum above the bass notes like an ancient chant from our cave. Laughter and gratitude warm the room, heat our souls, and spark a divine emotion. A motorcyclist leaning in the doorway explains the Venturi effect as air rushes through the narrow opening. You bikers know about that. In the heaviest heat, when no one expects more than a cold beer, a musical magician churns the right liqueurs. Who could know that the bachelorette party would use the Venturi breeze, the Motown moves, the rock and roll brown-eyed girl with her heart thumping down in the hollow moment to descend into Oli's. The bride-to-be and her retinue enter our cavern, which is filled with the music of their elders, a tavern filled with life's ruin and resurrection. Where the dartboard hangs, an unseen hurler has thrown the perfectly aimed projectile. The young women with their creamy faces and excited bodies circle the bride-to-be and push her toward a ritual chair where she teases and admires a seated, goateed man stranger. She practices her chest rolls, the ones that will call her groom to bed, the ones she'll offer him for a promise, the ones that will beckon a soul from the invisible world so that she might bring a child into this world. The Dionysian Maenads circle Yada, and he never stops strumming. He churns the ritual sea. He stirs the river's foam for Aphrodite. This is a holy gopi dream, the rite of pre-matrimonial goddesses. The young women's breasts play with Yada's knees. Their sexual vessels spark with lightning. They bob and throb and lift toward the music. It's the voices and the sousaphone's vast horn curled like a great goddess's vaginal tract. Venus and Isis and Ishtar are here. Those of us with grown children remember and admire this prelude to marital mating. The tavern's entranced. The music gets higher, whistling and dancing into a cyclone. As Gibb drives harder and hits the one as he should, the women dance up on the bar. Their shaking creates ecstatic displays, and we elders witness the miracles. The sourest man gets light on his feet. A prude giggles and tickles her husband. A bartender's embarrassed. The jukebox won't take money. No one goes to the bathroom. But as quickly as they arrived, the maidens returned to the evening while the musicians play on and on. Who knows if they fled to the hills, to husbands or strangers down the road. Maybe Krishna ferried them across the river. Maybe they were baptized by John. Maybe they kissed the waves on Lake Pepin or merely drove back to the farm. Beside the Mississippi River on a hot Saturday in July, if the sky is cloudless, if the moon has yet to rise, if each star is a dancing pearl, maybe the music will bring you a goddess. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Thank you.